It's hard to believe that up until about 1955, most places around Puget Sound didn't have any garbage service. And a lot of people either burned their garbage in the backyard or tossed it all in the bay. There wasn't much plastic in those days, so mostly what you throw out, tossed in the bay would decompose, the seagulls would eat it, the glass would get ground up on the beach, and the tin cans would rust away. But the glass on the beach became a subject of quite a bit of interest. Over at Olympic College in Bremerton, where my brother started as an art student, Professor Mr. Blast decided to make a huge mural out of beach glass. These bottles, when they were tossed on the beach, then broke up. And there was green glass, and there was red glass, and white glass, and so forth. And we would pick up these pieces of glass. All summer long, we filled buckets, and they created this incredible mural. And it lives on today. You know, it was built up against the Math and Science building. They thought they were going to have to destroy it when they tore down the building, but some local folks rescued it, and now it's back and looks just beautiful on the campus. And if you haven't seen it, you should go see it, because it tells more than one story. It tells the story of mankind in his version, but it also tells the story of us. The fact that we used to just pollute Puget Sound with garbage and lots of bottles and cans and glass. Not anymore. And how it could be used creatively even in the 1950s. This truly is an incredible spot and one of my favorite places.
Here in the north end of Bainbridge Island is one of the gems of not only Puget Sound, but our entire state. That's the Bloedel Reserve. Francis and Virginia Bloedel set out to create a botanical garden. They set out to create a Japanese-style grounds. And you walk through the wooded lands and across the grasslands and so forth, you'll see all these influences just jump out at you. The Bloedel home is now the Manor House, and it's open to the public, and you can tour it today, as well as look at the other very interesting buildings.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Republican media availability. With us today from the House Republican Caucus, we have House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbury of the 31st District and Representative Travis Couture, Ranking Member on the House Appropriations Committee from the 35th District. From the Senate Republican Caucus, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun of the 20th District and Senator Chris Gildon, Ranking Member Operating Budget on the Senate Ways and Means Committee from the 25th District. With that, I will turn it over to Representative Stokesbury for some opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I think this might be week 11 of the legislature. I've lost track a little bit. but it is budget week here, and boy, there is a lot to look at and care about. Democrats in the House and Senate released their budget proposals yesterday, as I assume all of you know. And it is an awfully troubling direction that the House and Senate majorities would take us in. Their budgets would tax the jobs right out of Washington, but it wouldn't just tax the jobs out of Washington, it would tax the joy out of Washingtonians. The headlines have led with some of the job-killing taxes. Excuse me, there is a tax there is literally a tax on jobs. And 2 years ago or 4 years ago, the legislature passed the Climate Commitment Act, which established a tax on carbon under the economic theory that by making something you don't want more expensive, companies will emit less of it. Somehow that same economic theory hasn't translated to their jobs tax, where they're doing the exact same thing. They are making it more expensive to give somebody a good paying job, and somehow we're going to be surprised when that means we have less jobs in Washington. There is a massive B&O tax increase that will trickle down to ordinary consumers, and for the first time in state history, and for the first time, as far as I know, any state in the country, they would impose what they're calling a wealth tax, but which is more accurately an innovation tax. And that will mean, if Washington passes that, that will mean that all of the economic success the state has enjoyed over the past several decades, thanks to companies like Amazon and Microsoft, Washington's position in that regard will erode extremely quickly, as the next Jeff Bezos and the next Bill Gates will look to other states like Florida and Texas to start their new billion-dollar idea, and not here in Washington. So an extremely short-sighted idea that almost certainly is unconstitutional and almost certainly won't work anyway. But it's not just businesses, and it's not just jobs they're going after. Like I said, they're trying to tax the joy right out of Washingtonians. Their budget assumes an increased tax on bottled beverages, an increased tax on all kinds of vacations that you or I might want to take. There's a tax on short-term rentals that's been introduced. It would increase liquor license fees, including banquet permits for things like weddings or parties. It would increase Discover Pass fees. It would impose a new tax on Zyn. They have a bill to impose a tax on wireless devices. There's an increased gas tax, a highway use fee, just all sorts of things that regular Washingtonians like to do would be taxed under this proposal. Oh, there's a $1 fee added to tickets to sporting events. Democrats are raising billions of dollars in taxes on businesses, but not content with that, are also nickel and diming Washingtonians out of every last joy they can find in life. Not only are they taxing recreational activities like Discover Passes, hunting and fishing licenses, and event tickets, they're also just passing costs right on to the middle class. Their property tax increase would directly affect middle-class homeowners. Their gas tax increases would directly affect middle-class and working-class families. They do several moves in the budget that shift healthcare costs from the state onto private sector employers, which would mean and individuals who have health insurance on the health insurance exchange. The average cost of healthcare would go up by $1,400 per family per year under the Democrats' plan. So it would kill jobs in the economy. It would just torture the joy out of ordinary Washingtonians, and it would shift massive costs onto the middle class and working Washingtonians. So absolute wrong direction, and looking forward to finding a better direction in the next 30 days. And so speaking of better directions, I have with me, who'll be here to answer some questions, Travis Couture, who is the ranking Republican on the House Appropriations Committee, and also John Braun, my colleague over in the Senate Minority Leader, and Senate Republicans have also been proposing an alternative way of their own. So with that, I will hand it over to John to talk a little bit about the budget and what his caucus is working on.
Great. Oh, thank you, Drew, and thank you everyone for being here today. Lots going on here in Olympia, and I agree with everything that Representative Stokesbury said about the proposals that the Democratic majorities have presented over the last few days in terms of taxes and budgets. Just going back to our priorities on public safety, I want to highlight in the Senate Democratic budget, doesn't fund additional money for law enforcement, something that Governor Ferguson has vowed to veto if not included. So hopefully that will rectify itself over time, but very disappointing start. On affordability, there's lots to talk about, and Drew covered the impact, whether it's the innovation tax or the jobs tax or a property tax. It's particularly hard. By far, the worst one we've seen over the last few years, which was soundly rejected by people around the state last year as they called in and insisted that the Democratic majority in the Senate not move forward with that bill. Now they've taken off the 3% limit and raised it to inflation plus population, which the average would be about 4.5%, but could be higher than 8% in recent years. So this is a big deal, very hard hit directly to homeowners and renters around the state. And the idea that it was suggested yesterday, I think at the House Democratic availability, that this will be a decision by local governments is not accurate. This increase in property tax is taken right in both the Senate and the House budget. They take advantage of this raising of the cap directly, and we have every reason to assume many local governments will take this a higher rate, and it will result in billions of dollars of new property taxes in our state when people are having trouble affording just to live here. And then finally, with K-12, I think there's a little bit mixed. I'm certainly happy with some of the funding that shows up for K-12 for material supplies and operating costs and for special education. But to do it based on these very punitive taxes to the state's economy simply assures that future years will not have funding available for K-12. So it may look good in the near term, but it's not solving the problem. It's not living within our means, and it's the wrong direction for Washington. The last thing I want to say is, as we've heard yesterday, they're not going to actually pass any of these taxes until after they negotiate a deal, presumably in private without any visibility. I would call for them right now. At the very least, they need to hold hearings on these bills. Public needs a chance to weigh in on these taxes that will have long-term harm to our economy and affect folks at every income level. With that, I'm happy to recognize that Senator Chris Gilden, who's been our budget lead, is joining us again today to talk about specific budget and tax issues before the Senate, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
All right, with that, we will go to Jerry Cornfield.
Good morning. I guess first, a question about fact checking. Representative Stokesbury, you said these taxes would cost $1,400, I think, per year to an average homeowner or family. Could someone on your staff provide the information on how you came up with that number? And
yeah,
then,
Jerry, that's with regard to Senate Bill 5083, which would create a price cap for PEB and SED. We can find out who provided us that number, but it's for it's the average premium increase for a family of four, and the way it works is the bill would limit how much PEB and SED plans are paying to hospitals, which would require the cost of care to be shifted onto private plans.
Okay. And then I guess the broader question. There seemed to be yesterday there were Republican members of the Senate and the House supporting the gas tax. So I'm just wondering, is that a mixed message about affordability and the impact of taxes when some members of your caucus are supporting some taxes and a pretty significant one? So you're sending two messages there.
I would just say, yeah, each of our members will decide how they're going to support the legislation in front of them. And we do have folks who have negotiated in good faith on the transportation package in the Senate and have decided to support those taxes. Those are not broadly supported by our caucus. And frankly, if we were just talking about support for those taxes and then in response to an additional $800 million per year from the operating budget into the transportation budget, I think that might have more appeal, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that plus punitive, enormous new taxes into the operating budget to make this whole thing go forward. So the first part of that, which was an agreement to get operating budget into the transportation budget, I think that Republicans have worked in good faith to try to make that happen. But then we've been, the add-on of $18 billion in new operating budget taxes makes that whole deal just one most of us will not support.
Yeah, Jerry, I would, first of all, I'm not sure that there's anybody in the House Republican caucus that has come out in support of a gas tax at this point. Also, my comment is how the gas tax interacts with the billions of dollars in other taxes that are on the table now, and the litany of fees and permit increases and cost increases the Democrat budget would pass on to ordinary Washingtonians. If the only new tax on the table this session was a gas tax, and it was necessary to continue to provide roads that meet our growing transportation demands and address the fact that we have some underlying structural issues with the transportation budget, that's one thing, but that is not all the Democrats rolled out. And in addition to a gas tax, they rolled out a cell phone tax. They rolled out various taxes on beverages, a tax on Zinn, a tax on event tickets, higher costs for Discover passes and hunting and fishing licenses, various kinds of taxes on vacations, whether it's increased rental car taxes, taxes on short-term rentals. So it is how the gas tax interacts with the litany of other taxes that that House Democrats are passing on to ordinary Washingtonians that I think has me bothered. But John's right. Individual members will make individual decisions, and but my point is I think there's a difference when you look at how that gas tax interacts with all the other taxes that Democrats are proposing as well.
Did you have a follow-up, Jerry?
No, I see hands up. I'll wait.
All right, next we'll go to Jeannie Lindsay.
Hello, good morning. I know that the focus of your comments right now, understandably, are the tax proposals, but I wanted to ask, obviously, the budgets also include a number of cuts and some additional new spending. Senator Braun, you sort of talked a little bit about that in terms of special education, education materials. I'm wondering if there are any things that you're seeing in these budget proposals that you like in terms of cuts or some of the additional spending. Is there anything that you're glad to see there?
Well, as I said earlier, I think, I've worked for years to get additional investment in special education. So I'm pleased with the emphasis. I think this is the wrong year to do it. We could have done a package like this a few years ago when we had a significant surplus without, punitive new taxes. That would be easy to support, So am I supportive of more funding for special education? Yes. Do I think this is the year to do it in? Not at the expense of these new taxes. The same thing goes for material supplies and operating costs. I think that's a real cost driven by policies put in place by the Democratic majorities have driven up energy costs, driven up insurance costs as a result of those policies. And we have a responsibility, both based on the fact that we caused it, we being the Democratic majority in the legislature, and the fact that we have a paramount duty to fund basic education. So I guess I could show a little bit of love to those ideas, but there's a ton of stuff that it cuts in the budget. I'm sure Senator Gildon could speak to this better than I could, but I'll highlight a couple. This proposed cut or increase, cut to higher education and increase in tuition. That's just another tax increase on middle income Washingtonians, both in terms of, and then they also have a reduction in student aid in the same bill. That's a terrible cut. And I'm going to highlight again the one that Representative Stokesbury brought up, this shift in how PEB and SEB pay for medical expenses. That's a direct cut to hospitals and rural hospitals in particular, with the very real threat of putting them out of business. It's sort of callous the way that they're going after access to health care in rural Washington.
Yeah, I will I'll add a couple points to that. On a macro level, yes, there is one large thing I appreciate about both House and Senate budgets, and that's for the first time in what's now my 11th session, members of the Democratic Party decided to actually take a close look at opportunities for budget savings. It is insane that it took them 11 years and however long it was before I got elected when they last did it to actually do this. We would not be facing nearly the problem we're facing if this was a routine order of business rather than something you only do when revenues aren't growing as quickly as you expected. But I appreciate that they finally did it. Better late than never. Two examples that I will highlight. just because they're areas that I worked on when I was Travis's predecessor on Appropriations Committee. Evergreen State College enrollment has been plummeting over the last decade. Their funding formula is not based on how many students they have, and so their funding has stayed roughly the same, while their enrollment has plummeted, meaning their funding per student has risen dramatically. And they are currently receiving far more money on a per student basis than any other of the four-year institutions. That's not right. There's no reason to do that. We shouldn't use taxpayer dollars to prop up a failing higher education experiment. And so for years, House Republicans have been proposing not to eliminate Evergreen State College, although I think we have a few members that would gladly do that, but simply to give them the same amount of funding per student as all the other regional four-years get. That is common sense. We should not be sinking money into a failed education experiment, and the Democrat majority finally realizes that. This was the basis for numerous budget amendments that Republicans have proposed over the years, and it is finally part of the House Democratic budget. The other one is a student loan program. Washington State has the most generous financial aid package of any state in the country. Those are in the form of grants and scholarships. Why on earth the legislature thought it was a good idea to get in the business of being a student loan lender on top of the extremely generous financial aid package that already existed is beyond me. Washington is not very good at doing things outside of its core competency. Frankly, we're not very good at doing things inside of our core competency either. But we never should have gotten into the student loan business. Republicans fought that idea for years. Democrats passed it anyway, and this Democratic budget actually finally undoes that and gets rid of the money in that loan account and hopefully gets Washington out of the student loan servicing business for good. There are plenty of things to complain about. So while the Democrats finally did undergo some reduction exercises and find areas where we could achieve budget savings, they still spent way more than they cut. And that doesn't make very much sense to be in a situation where your revenues are no longer growing as you expected, but to double or triple down on new spending. If we didn't spend all this new money and mostly centered on the reductions, we wouldn't need a $15 billion tax increase. We probably wouldn't need a tax increase at all with the savings the Democrats have outlined. So the taxes are being raised by choice, not by necessity, and by increasing all this new spending. First of all, it signals an admission of guilt that the amount of spending the Democrats have passed over the years was not incorrect. They were simply wrong about what they were funding because they want to replace things they have funded for the past decade with new items. So that suggests they were wrong for the last decade, which kind of begs the question of what makes us so sure they're right about the new spending this time around. And also by raising spending so much, we're just setting ourselves up for having the same conversation in the future. By raising spending this biennium by something like 9% and another 10+% over the next biennium, the next time there's a serious economic downturn or serious trouble at the federal level or something, or some kind of economic shock, we're going to be right back here looking to raise taxes yet again on working class Washingtonians. So that's the wrong direction. I appreciate that they made some savings, but they've undone all the possible good they could do by raising new spending in all kinds of other areas.
And if I could jump in a little bit here as well, I find this budget proposal very interesting in a number of ways. And, obviously the budget reflects priorities. So in this particular budget proposal, you have Senate Democrats foregoing enhanced rates for childcare. So they're foregoing making childcare less expensive. And at the same time, they're raising taxes by about $21 billion. They are also increasing college tuition by about $700 for an incoming freshman, which will increase to about $900 a year by the time that freshman becomes a senior. And at the same time, they're increasing taxes. They're also increasing the bed fees for long-term care. All of these are, priority values judgments. And then, they're trying to give raises to state employees and then turning around and putting those same employees on furlough to achieve savings. So I find this budget proposal very confusing. Either it's a savings budget or it's a taxing budget, but I think what we have is a budget that tries to do both. And if you look at most of the items that are being spent, the new spending items, about half of them deal with pay and benefits for state employees. So I think that it's very telling that the values of Senate Democrats seem to align with increasing pay and benefits for state workers as opposed to maintaining affordability for homeowners, property, renters, for college students, for people who need long-term care. All of those items, these are values judgments, and I think that this budget is very telling of where their values lie.
I'd like to jump in there too, just to tack on to what Senator Gildon has said. A couple more examples. I mean, we just, like Representative Stokesbury stated, just in the first biennium alone, an 8% increase to spending and the largest set of tax increases in state history. But then we cut from the people who needed us the most. We robbed child support from single mothers on TANF. I mean, just doesn't make any sense. And we have this enormous end fund balance after it's all said and done. The age blind and deaf program, we rob, those poor people of the assistance, the public assistance that they need in that budget. To me, that just seems like if you're going to increase a massive 8-9% increase in spending, and then the largest set of tax increases in state history, it seems like the only people that are going to, as of right now, win in this session are bureaucrats and politicians who are getting their pays increased, and criminals. And the Democrats have created a budget that may balance on paper, but it's a house of cards sitting on a pile of sand. It's really shaky, and they have done so by robbing people who need us the most. It was exactly the reason that they stated they needed these tax increases to stop people from dying, to stop poor people from getting even further into poverty, but yet they created a budget that did exactly that. And so to Senator Gildon's point, it's interesting. It just doesn't really, when you look at it, just doesn't make a whole lot of sense based upon what was being said by the other side.
All right, Jeannie, do you have a follow-up?
All right now, thank you.
All right, let's go to Drew Mickelson. Are you there, Drew? All right, let's go to Carlene Johnson.
Okay, I have two questions. First, Rep. Couture, if you could, I was in that hearing yesterday on 5181, and you asked the question of staff about the title of the bill, and didn't really get, it seems like a straight answer from staff. Can you elaborate further on what you were getting at there?
Yeah, so 5181 is the Senate version of, basically the Parents' Rights Bill, trying to amend the Parents' Bill of Rights. And so the bill itself amends Initiative 2081. It erases some of the protections for parents that that initiative put in place, and that most of the legislature almost unanimously voted out and became law last session. However, the title of the bill, which is important here in Olympia because your bill has to do what the title says it has to do. So what the title of the bill says is it allows the bill to amend the Parents' Rights Initiative for the purposes of bringing it in alignment with existing law. Well, Initiative 2081 is existing law, and so there's no way to actually amend that and be in order with the title. And so I feel like 5181 could have a significant legal challenge down the road just based on that alone, because we've seen in other places. We had another initiative, 2066, about the natural gas ban that was recently struck down by a radical judge in King County. But when that bill, that initiative was created because of, was going through the state Senate, a session ago, that bill was called a hot mess by the lieutenant governor because it was drafted incorrectly. Now in the Senate, you can change the title, but in the House, you cannot change the title, and it's too late to go back. So I don't feel like that bill is constitutional anymore. But what the Office of Program Research staff was saying to me in response is that, you know, it could be challenged and it would be up to a court to decide, which is a common response here in Olympia for anything that is unconstitutional.
But 1296 is even worse from your opinion, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, if I was going to pick a worse one, 1296 is worse. So I'm cheering on Senator Braun and Gildon to go do what they can to fight that back against that bill and go kill it. It's a broader bill and it has more concerning provisions, even after some of the few amendments that House Republicans won as a result of, you know, a month of national coverage about certain amendments.
And my second question for Senator Gildon, is there anything that the majority party has siphoned off of your budget proposal? Any of your good ideas they're trying to steal or tweak, or anything in there that you saw that you went, oh, that was a good idea, I came up with that?
Well, you know, it was interesting because we were actually in the room with Senate Democrats during the first couple of iterations of going through the budget. And my feel from being in the room with them at that time was that they were genuinely looking for items to save. So then at a certain point in the budget, you know, we were not invited back into the conversation anymore. And it seems to have been when everything went off of the skids at that point. So I was actually really surprised to see a proposal come out with $21 billion of new tax increases over the period. But there are some similarities, like our budget. We realized that that there are some of the items, I've been calling them layaway bills, that you need to forego making some of those layaway purchases, and they also do that. But it's just interesting that they do that and choose to raise taxes at the same time. And I think this whole conversation about, you know, is it necessary to raise taxes? And if you don't raise taxes, you're going to be facing all of these horrible cuts that no one wants. And that whole discussion is absolutely false, Carlene, because we have proven it. The Senate Republicans have drafted a budget that does not include any new taxes. It does not include any of the drastic cuts that you'll hear fear-mongering about. It fully provides for the needs of our state government. It honors the wishes of our new governor to provide funding for law enforcement hiring. It keeps people with services that need services. So if you need services, you're going to continue to get them. It provides additional money for K-12 operating costs and special education. And it does all of that without a single new dollar of taxes. It can be done if you want to do it. All of these taxes, the whole conversation about this is simply not necessary.
Yeah, and I just want to tack on to what Senator Gildon just said. He's absolutely correct. But, you know, these budgets are basically the same story all over again. For the fourth consecutive session now, a budget proposal that spends more than we project to take in. We have done the Democrats have done no real structural budget reform into the practices that they perform to come up with these budgets. And of course, we're just going to be back here once again someday, after this session is over, no matter what happens, because we haven't fixed the actual problems that led us to this place. As a matter of fact, we've just done more of it in these budgets when they've kicked out things like child care entitlements and ECAP. They're just kicking the can down the road. Those are those layaway bills. They just put them on layaway once again, right? So we're going to have to pay those bills someday. Maybe not in this 4-year outlook, but maybe in the next one. And, you know, we're not learning any lessons here. Once again, massively overreaching on our revenue assumptions. I think Rep. Stokesbury pointed that out. and we just continue the reckless spending, and then we've got the largest set of tax increases in state history on top of it. You know, what are we doing here is really the question. We haven't learned any of the lessons of why we're in the position we're in right now, and there's almost nothing in either the Senate or House budget that recognizes that and has any kind of structural reform, or even kind of lives in a reality where, you know, your revenue assumptions are something that you know, isn't wildly out of step with what's actually happening here in Washington. I mean, Republicans warned about it in 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and now we're warning about it again in 2025. We'll be back here again in 2026 and 2027 talking about it once again. We've done absolutely nothing to fix our absolutely erroneous revenue assumptions. We have done nothing structurally to cap spending. We have done nothing to protect taxpayers from the largest tax increases in state history. At some point, you have to be able to take a step back and learn your lessons and have some kind of structural budget reform so we don't find ourselves back here again. But instead, the majority party is going to paper over their budgeting negligence and their failures to have any of these structural budget reforms on the backs of the middle class and hardworking Washingtonians. They're going to pay the price, and in years to come, they're going to pay the price once again when, oh my God, the sky is falling and we have to raise taxes in order to cover another predictable deficit. And it's wrong. People are sick and tired of it. That's why 2/3 of Washingtonians do not want new taxes. They want to rein in the out of control spending here in Olympia. People just can't take much more. A lot of people in my district just want to move. When you couple the devastating property tax proposals with something like a rent control policy, what a devastating thing for housing supply, what a devastating thing for renters and senior citizens on fixed incomes. I mean, it is terrible, it's wrong, and the only reason we're doing it is because they failed to budget and they failed to rein in and say no to some of the spending we never needed to do.
All right, next we'll go to Drew Mickelson.
Morning. The Senate budget that was proposed by Democrats drains the rainy day fund. $1.6 billion is what Senator Robinson told us. The state treasurer is raising concerns about that, especially with the potential uncertainty from the federal government. I imagine you share those concerns. Is that something that any of your budgets looked at? Should we be draining that fund for this biennium?
I can grab that if you'd like, Drew. So not only does it drain our savings account down to $25 million in 2026, it also drains our checking account, our operating budget down to $66 million. So basically in the year 2026, our state will be broke. We will have just expended an enormous amount of taxing authority, and we will have no options should the federal government make changes to Medicaid rates or any of the other items that they may. We're going to be left without options, without money. It is a very reckless item. I agree with the state treasurer that this is something we should absolutely not do.
And just to tag on to that, it is nice that the House budget did not raid the rainy day fund, but the Senate budget absolutely does. So we'll have to see how that shakes out during the process. But once again, in the Senate version, they're raiding our emergency savings account, things we need for emergencies, in order to bail out majority party bad decision making. That is wrong. We should not be doing it. Like Senator Gildon said, it puts our credit rating at risk. But then if something happens on a national level or anywhere else, we don't have the funds available for wildfires or for many other different things where we would get those large sums of money from. It's just a practice that has to stop. I think it was like the last 3 sessions, they've raided the rainy day account. They put it into their shadow rainy day account, warped with the simple majority, spent all the money on new programs that we still can't pay for today. And at some point, people got to stand up and say, hey, our emergency rainy day savings account should not be used to expand or create new programs or just be put into more reckless spending. We have to have a savings account for things in our state.
Did you have a follow-up, Drew?
Thanks.
No? Okay. Next, we will go to Mitchell Rowland of the Spokesman Review.
Good morning. On the topic of furloughs / the CBAs for state employees, there's now 4 competing proposals. Governor Ferguson previously proposed 2 years of furloughs. Senate Democrats proposed 1 year. House Democrats proposed no cuts. And Senate Republicans proposed foregoing the CBAs in lieu of a $5,000 bonus. Given the budgets that were relayed or announced yesterday, do you see a path forward with fulfilling the CBAs without either cuts, a furlough, or other type of reduction in salary for state employees?
I mean, there's always a path forward to do that. I'm not sure it's all that likely. The reality is, whether they admit it by declaring the collective bargaining agreements financially infeasible or simply try to work around it by using furloughs, there's broad recognition, I think, at least internally, that we can't afford $4 billion in new raises. And I want to add, you've heard me say this before, this is for folks, state employees, who we should pay well, and we do pay well, and currently make on average more money than the average private sector employee. In my district, close to $20,000 a year more than the average private sector employee. So all this is different ways to recognize that we've negotiated contracts that haven't been approved and shouldn't be approved because we can't afford them in the financial environment we have. Now, whether the majority Democrats will come to that conclusion or not, I can't say. It's interesting that when shown the proposal from the Senate Republicans on a $5,000 bonus in lieu of the collective bargaining agreements, and of course they'd have to go back and renegotiate the collective bargaining agreements. The Democratic majority said we were stiffing state employees, and yet by the basic math, they turned around and stiffed them even, if that's how they define it. They did much worse by state employees, and I think you don't have to take my word for it. Go look at the social media for our public sector unions. They're not too happy with the furloughs because they recognize they're getting run over and they don't like it. The reality is the proposal, I believe at least, the proposal Senate Republicans put forward is the best deal. It's actually more money, more progressive. Folks that make less than $80,000 a year make more money under the proposal that Senator Gildon put together than the underlying collective bargaining agreement, and certainly much better than the furlough program. Whether they recognize reality and what's best for our state employees, and particularly what's best and delivered in a more progressive way, I couldn't tell you, but I hope so.
Mitchell, did you have a follow-up?
Not on this topic. Kind of switching gears, and this is more of a process question. Governor Ferguson also indicated that he wouldn't sign a budget that didn't include a $100 million grant program for more police officers. Is there still a path forward for that proposal in this session?
Yeah, so as I understand it, there was a version of the Senator Holy Representative Hunter Abel bill that the Governor Ferguson had kind of championed early in session. It's House Bill 2015. And that essentially is a version that makes localities increase their own sales tax in order to receive some money from these grant programs with a lot of strings attached. And so we tried to put $100 million into that bill, which did pass and is assumed in the House version, but they underfunded it, only $25 million for the biennium. And so it's running significantly short of the promises that were made earlier in the session. And of course, in the Senate version, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I think it's zero. So when zero in the Senate version. So when those two budgets collide, there might be some chance to negotiate we'll see what happens, something in there. But like as Senator Gildon said, when they come to conference, we're not really invited into the room for the operating budget. So, we can put in our best effort to try to make sure that that program is included and funded. But, House Republicans had a problem with that anyway, because it was a massive regressive sales tax increase. But at least if they were going to do it, they should fully fund the grant programs. Instead, they underfunded it significantly, 25 million instead of 100 million. And here's the deal. I mean, if you're going to raise $15 billion, or in the Senate version, $20 billion in taxes, and you can't even help get you from 51 to 50 per capita police in the nation, I mean, that's pretty bad. That's a pretty bad signal. So I know that Republicans are going to be pushing hard to try to get more funding to police, and even if it's not necessarily in the best way that we like, but we understand that we need more police on the ground for public safety in our districts and our communities. But right now, the Democrats are falling significantly short of even the governor's request on that matter. And who knows, maybe he will follow through with his word and veto either of those budgets for not including that $100 million.
And I hate to keep selling it, but I'm going to mention it again. The Senate Republican budget fully funds what the governor had requested, $100 million to hire additional law enforcement officers, and it does so without raising any taxes.
All right, we will now go to Jake Goldstein Street.
Thanks. Non-budget related question. I wasn't sure if all of you had seen, but there were some protests at Representative Simmons' home over the weekend. I was just wondering what you thought of that tactic. Is that something you condemn? Representative Couture, I think you had even tweeted about it, but I was wondering if you all had thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we should all live in a civil society. No one should be protesting at someone's home. Oftentimes, I mean, if you're a legislator, you're here you're here in Olympia during the session, and that could be someone's, spouse or their kids or their family at home. Nothing positive comes from that. And it could scare people. I think the correct place to protest is in the public square, or even in the online public square, so to speak. Come down here and protest at Olympia. Come to the Capitol building and do it like everyone else does. Do it the right way. Don't go to somebody's house. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's right if it happens to a Democrat or a Republican. I think people want our politics to be more centered and balanced and normal. Right. And I don't care who does it on what side. It's not right to go to somebody's house and protest.
I want to emphatically agree with Representative Couture on this. This is the wrong way to express your opinion. You have every right and perhaps even a responsibility to express your opinion, but it should be done in a way that doesn't create a threatening environment for anyone on either side of the political spectrum.
Did you have a follow-up, Jake?
John, I'm sorry. I just want to say too, I agree with what Senator Braun said. That was exactly what I was going to say. Yes, of course, folks have got a right to do this, as long as they're on public property, but they've got a responsibility to protest in a better way. All of us in this Washington are just ordinary citizen legislators. We're regular people, sometimes shockingly regular, with regular jobs. I don't think it's even though there is a constitutional right to do so. I don't think it's morally right to be harassing folks in their own home and making them feel unsafe. There's plenty of other and better ways to get the message across, and that it's probably better to do that because that way the focus is on the underlying message. And Representative Simmons has an extremely troubling legislative record, and she worked very hard this session to let criminals out of jail early, and that would have made Washington less safe. And I am incredibly grateful for my colleagues and some members of her caucus for standing up to that and saying, no, we are not going to continue our soft on crime policy. But by protesting at her house, you lose the very good message, which is that Tara Simmons wants to let criminals out of jail early. Instead, how the protest was conducted was a story, and I don't think that's wise. So yes, they've got a right to do it, but I think they should do it in a more effective way. And I hope that the next time the WEA or other Democrat interest groups protest at Republicans' houses, which they have done many times in the last decade, Speaker Jenkins and Senator Peterson are just as quick to condemn their allies protesting at Republicans' houses as those of us on video right now are condemning the protests at Tara Simmons' house by our political allies.
All right. With that, we'll end questions, and I'll just send it back to Representative Stokesbury for closing remarks.
Yeah, well, thanks, John, and thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We'll just circle back to exactly what I opened with. The budgets that were introduced would take us in a dramatically wrong direction. They double down on the dramatic and explosive spending increases that have got us in this predicament in the first place. I think we should do a much better job at reining in spending and not setting us up for further and further tax increases year after year. But in this particular instance, the taxes the Democrats proposed will be really harmful. They will literally be taxing jobs out of Washington through their payroll tax, their innovation tax, and their B&O tax. But it is not just big businesses they're going after, it is regular people as well. They will raise healthcare costs, they will raise housing costs, and they will just tax the joy out of everyday life for Washingtonians, whether it's by taxing event tickets or raising hunting and fishing license fees, taxing Zyn, taxing adult beverages. Their creativity seems to know no bounds, and that is unfortunate because Washington can be a great place to live, but Democrats seem hell-bent on taxing the joy out of everyday Washingtonians, and I wish it weren't so.
Senator Brown?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you everyone for being here. Week after week, we are in week 5. It's getting exciting, not necessarily in a good way, but we got a lot to do in the next few weeks. Take it back to our priorities on public safety. You heard us talk about we're on the wrong track on funding officers. Hopefully we can get that turned around. On affordability, these taxes are going to be a disaster for businesses and individual Washingtonians alike, and make surviving in Washington, whether you're individual, a family, or a business, extraordinarily hard. And on K-12, while I appreciate some of the movement forward on special ed and MSOC, to do that at the expense of taxes that are going to drive people out of our state or out of their homes, I think it's just wrong, and we really need to rethink that. I'm hopeful that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will see the error of their ways and come to a budget that is more reasonable, closer to one that lives within our means and sets us up for success in the future, but that remains to be seen. Thanks again for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be back next Tuesday at the same time.